I'm going to talk to you about something at a much finer scale than what Dave was talking about. You've done something rather unusual in Ozaukee County. Hope to unpack the idea of what can be done at a fine scale about migratory bird stopover habitat. The Ozaukee Washington Land Trust purchased what had been a golf course for over 75 years. It's most unusual to take a piece of the landscape that has been intensively managed, such as a golf course generally is, and kind of turn it on its head and make it into a natural area again. So if you had been on Squires Country Club even as recently as 5 years ago, you would have seen what you would expect. Intensively managed, continually mowed, a lot of application of fertilizer and other chemicals to maintain the fairways and the greens. That's certainly not the case anymore. Next slide, please. So it's unique in Wisconsin, and actually unique in an even larger area, because it deliberately was set aside to be migratory stopover habitat, and that in itself is extremely unusual. It has this long history of intensive use, but has been reestablished as migratory bird habitat. Achieving that objective required considerable effort. Now that's a sentence with just a few words, but incorporated in those few words is an awful lot of work. So there are now 10 habitat types there, where there once was just basically mowed lawn, a few ponds. If you're a golfer or you know one, those ponds back in years past would have been described as water hazards. Well, they're not that at all anymore. There's a little patch of Lake Michigan shoreline, some mixed hardwood forest, several types of savanna, conifer area, shrubland, really important shrubland, a whole suite of new wetlands, some old fields, some native grasslands have been reestablished, and a smaller component of mowed cool season grasslands. And we'll tell you a little bit more about each one of those in turn as we go through. So why are we concerned about migratory stopover habitat in the Great Lakes? Well, Dave set the stage for us. Here's a quote from an important paper. Identifying areas where birds concentrate between migratory flights is the first step toward integrating migration habitat priorities into avian conservation plans. That's a well-chewed mouthful, a pretty important way to put this in perspective. Next, please. So if you're familiar with Ozaukee County, we'll try to locate you here geographically. This narrow ribbon here along the west side of this image is I-43. Up at the top left, the Belgium interchange. You may be familiar with Harrington Beach State Park. One of the interesting things that's happened here, very carefully planned, is Ozaukee County now has a kind of string of pearls of protected areas for birds, protected by different entities. State park land, also some state wildlife areas, a really incredibly new and exciting set of areas set aside by the Fish and Wildlife Service as grassland habitat. And last, and what I'm going to focus on today, is this kind of irregularly shaped parcel in the southeast corner here, Forest Beach Migratory Preserve, which once upon a time was a golf course. Next, please. So the Ozaukee Washington Land Trust has done an amazing set of properties that they've put together. Among land trusts in the state, they actually won Land Trust of the Year in 2012 because of the effectiveness of the work that they've done. Here's their mission: preserving the water resources, natural areas, and the working lands of Ozaukee and Washington County. Next, please. So what's the objective? What's behind all of this? What's the vision, and what are we trying to achieve? Really, on this property, often when you speak of ecological restoration, you're talking about turning back the clock to pre-settlement vegetation. That was definitely not the objective here, because we've created all of these, this array of habitat types, really with the goal of maximizing arthropod abundance for migratory birds. So here's another quote from a paper. The amount of hardwood forest cover at a landscape scale is often really positively correlated with arthropod abundance. And that's the thing that we're trying to get at. There are a few other key pieces in there, including the advancement and expansion of the shrub areas so that we have a lot more fruiting shrubs available to migratory birds in the fall. Fruit is not as important in the spring. Next. So the property served as Squires Country Club all the way from the 1930s up until 2009. 143.9 acres, 121 of those owned by the Land Trust. And then we've got a great partner in Lake Road Properties LLC just on the south end. 22.75 acres of Line E-Line's property is managed in concert with the Land Trust. So all of the decisions about management that the Land Trust is making, Lake Road Properties is going along with those and managing their section in the same way. It's kind of a series of lucky accidents here, because when the golf course went up for sale, it looked for a while as if some developers were going to get a hold of it, and then it just would have been made into a landscape filled with tract homes. We were very fortunate, again, through a series of events. The owner of Lake Road Properties stepped up with a temporary donation to the Land Trust that made it possible for them to buy the land. And then in 2009, the Land Trust got a stimulus grant. You may remember this language, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the other term for the stimulus grant. It was $452,000 managed through the Fish and Wildlife Service to do reestablishment of the native landscape here in all these different habitat types that we've chosen. So the purpose of the funding, and again, you may remember some of this familiar language from the period of the stimulus, to implement shovel-ready restoration activities while stimulating the local economy. So the contractors that took part in this project were all from southeastern Wisconsin and Ozaukee County. A few other partners, such as the Fish and Wildlife Service, helped us direct how to construct the wetlands. Wisconsin Waterfowl Association has a lot of experience with that, and they were heavily involved in that as well. So you can see the center of the property, the old clubhouse. We'll show you a few pictures of that at the end. That's actually important in a different way. And those few existing ponds, that old terminology, water hazard, you know, so the golfers had to deal with those. There were only a handful of them, and they had stayed the same configuration for many years. And surrounding us are these environmental corridors that are fairly important. This one in particular, this is wet lowland woods here, and the lakeshore. And if you can see the blue boundary, you'll notice that most of the actual lakeshore is private land, and there we have many neighbors who own homes in this section here. Next. Existing wetlands, I mentioned this long, narrow stretch of lowland woods to our west here, and then the original ponds on the site. That's greatly changed. Next. And the hydric soils that made it possible for us to kind of reestablish the hydrology that this place once had and make it possible for us to put wetlands back in. Next. And of course, most of you are aware that the landscape's crisscrossed with a network of drain tiles. Well, one of the things that was important to reestablishing and creating these new wetlands is removing and breaking the existing drain tiles on that property so we could reestablish the original hydrology. Next. So here's our concept. We've got a couple slides about this. What did we want to do? Most of you are familiar with Noel Cutright. Well, this was one of Noel's genius ideas to establish this kind of patchwork quilt of habitat types. Again, try to consider to yourself, you know, this is a little different from the typical ecological restoration because we're really trying to create a lot of different kinds of opportunities for migratory birds and for providing food for them. So designed to attract the greatest number and diversity of bird species. Were we successful? I'll leave that to you to decide. We wanted to develop these multiple wetland areas to not only support birds, but also herptiles and aquatic invertebrates. And we'll leave it to you to decide whether we were successful with that too. Plans for trails through all of the habitat types. We've often got this as the last bulleted point, but it's a really important key piece in all of this, using this site as a means to do public education about migratory birds and their conservation. Next, please. So more of these goals. We wanted to enhance the diversity and abundance of feeding and resting areas for migratory birds, with an emphasis on the T&E species and the species of greatest conservation need, otherwise known as species of special concern. We wanted to create and enhance these landforms and the vegetation that facilitates groundwater recharge. Again, remember, this landscape had been so completely heavily managed very intensively for all those decades. So this is a chance for us to be able to recharge the groundwater that's there. We wanted to plant vegetation that would enhance carbon sequestration, and again, last on the list, provide education and some outdoor recreation opportunities at this site. Next. So we wanted to enhance those unique natural features of Ozaukee County that have always been there. We wanted to provide public access and some nature-based recreation and educational opportunities for that area. We wanted to reclaim the area's ecological health through restoring those wetlands, reestablishing native plants, and removing non-native vegetation and invasive species. And Kelly's going to talk a lot more to you about that this afternoon. That's going to be an ongoing battle in the war that we're all going to be dealing with for decades and decades to come. We also wanted to enhance Lake Michigan water quality, and that was actually a key piece in the grant that got this stimulus funding, because again, picture the golf course with this annual application of many kinds of chemicals, definitely not good for Lake Michigan water quality. Well, all of that's come to an end, because it's not lawn, it's not fairway, it's not greens that are needing those applications of chemicals anymore. It's something completely different now. Next. So I mentioned there was only a narrow stretch of beach. The land trust owns this relatively narrow area of access to the beach. This is all private inholding with many homes in here. So although we're very close to the Lake Michigan shoreline, we only have a relatively narrow stretch right on the water itself. Next. Somewhat more important, we actually had a lot of great discussions about what we were going to do with those conifers on the site. A lot of them are mature trees, and they bear pretty good cone crops every so often. So we decided, even though some of them are not native to Ozaukee County, we decided to keep them. That's turned out to be a great decision. During this invasion year of crossbills, we've had many flocks of both red and white-winged crossbills utilizing the cones on all of those existing mature conifers. Plus 5 smaller areas that you can see in that same color around the site. Next. We've had a conifer planting plan, so part of the restoration involved adding both trees and shrubs, both coniferous trees and shrubs to the restoration concept. So some areas you can see 791 trees and shrubs here, another 114 here, 137 there. So carefully chosen array of conifers, and only native species were planted. Next. Now here's this is looking south from the area where our Raptor Watch platform is. Here's an example of those conifers that we kept. Now it looks much different. Remember, this was all fairways and greens at one time. Right in this area and a little bit to the right of where you're looking here, one September day, I had 175 palm warblers in about 90 minutes. And 3 days later, Tom Schaefer counted 450 eastern bluebirds moving through this section here. So is it providing what migratory birds need? I would say that it definitely is. Next. So our original area of mixed hardwood forest is along the edge of the property here, a larger parcel there, but we're expanding that by planting a lot of trees and shrubs there. Of course, that's going to take a couple human generations for us to see those trees and shrubs become mature. Next. And just some photos of the existing woodlands that are on the property now. Next. So another important quote, really critical for migratory birds, these edge habitats, and that's exactly what we have here in abundance. So this mixture of different habitat types is providing exactly what we need for maximizing the diversity of arthropods that are available to migratory birds. And can't give you a better image than this. That's exactly an area that we find a great variety of migrants during migration. Next. Cool season grassland. Why did we want that? And why do we continue to mow it? There's a kind of an unusual habitat that many of you who are birders are very familiar with. If you want to see black-bellied plovers and American golden plovers and maybe buff-breasted sandpipers in the fall, you often go to what? A sod farm. So there are small areas that kind of mimic that and will be available to those species. Next. Native grassland, some more extensive areas that were planted with a mix of native grasses and forbs. Next. And even though we're not focusing on the breeding species, they've already responded in just a couple of years. We've got good numbers of meadowlarks and a couple of the other grassland species that are nesting on the property. Again, this is illustrative of what happens. During 2012, we had a banner year for dick sissels, an important grassland species here in Wisconsin. We were actually, Tom can agree with me here, he knows a lot about this, he actually counted a lot of them himself. We had dick sissels in every one of Wisconsin's 72 counties. We had more dick sissels than we normally get. Well, in the surrounding landscape, mid-June, a lot of dick sissels out there singing in those grassland parcels. What happened? Within about a week, everybody does their haying. So there's a tremendous amount of mowing. And what do those dick sissels do? They get up and leave those hay fields because they can't stay there. And where did they come? They came to Forest Beach. And I had the highest density of dick sissels that I've ever witnessed anywhere. One transect about 300 meters, I had 70 singing males. Never experienced anything like that in more than a half century of studying birds. So it's been very important for the local population of those individuals. Next. So we did remove some trees and stumps from some of those areas that were selected to be native grassland. Next. He created some parcels of oak savanna. That's not typically, again, that's not really pre-settlement vegetation for Ozaukee County typically, but it's very important for some migratory species such as red-headed woodpecker, orchard oriole, a few other species like that. They've really responded, and we often see them in those areas during migration now. Next. So here are my dick sissels here in the upper left. Eastern meadowlark, bobolink. Again, although we didn't focus so much on breeding birds here, we've got a lot of breeding bobolinks and meadowlarks every summer, and then last year we had great success with the dick sissels. Yes. So here's our planting plan for oak savanna. Again, all native species, tree species, shrub species, 300 trees and shrubs, 12 acres, plus the native grasses and forbs that were put in there. Next. So some areas of old field, and in the interim now, some of those grassland patches will seem kind of old field-like because there's still a lot of other species still in the seed bank that are expressing themselves. And because this area is surrounded with agricultural land and private homes, it's going to be kind of difficult to do prescribed burns here. So some areas will require mowing and some other management prescriptions instead of prescribed burns. We'll see how the neighbors respond to that in the future years. Next. Again, some savanna, and this is actually not very many oaks in here. We had a lot of discussions about what we're going to do with the ashes on the property. We know we're going to lose a lot of our ashes because of the emerald ash borer, and we didn't want to create groves of young ash seedlings that we're going to lose anyway. Good friend of mine, Joel Trick, who is from this area, I've actually been teasing him the last couple summers that up here in this corner there, I'm going to have the Joel Trick Memorial Ash Grove, which is probably only going to live about 4 years. But we took out a lot of the most heavy seed bearers among the mature ashes, and we'll show you what we did with those. Next. Shrubland. Shrubland birds are kind of like poor cousin. You know, we talk a lot about forest birds and wetland birds. We don't focus too much on shrubland birds, but there's a real important group of shrubland species that are really in decline. Brown thrasher is a good example. So we focused hard on providing some new areas of shrubland with especially fruit-bearing shrubs. It's going to take a couple of years for those to get established enough to provide fruit, but they're responding well so far. Next. Wetlands, we really focused hard on this. Remember those early maps that I showed you with just that little handful? Well, all of these wetlands were specifically designed. One end is shallow. Every one of them has a water control structure on them so that we can actually draw them down twice a year, once in spring, again in late summer and early fall, to provide habitat for shorebirds. And the shorebirds have really responded. We had some challenges in 2012 because, as you all remember, it was a pretty dry year, so some of the smaller wetlands completely dried up and never refilled during the summer. We certainly hope that's not going to be the case in a normal year going forward. But the Wisconsin Waterfowl Association has a lot of experience. They, in tandem with the Fish and Wildlife Service, helped us design and create all of these new wetlands. Next. So if you had been standing in the spot where this photo was made 5 years ago, you would have been looking at Fairway and Green. Now it's got a great wetland, home to my friend the green heron, who visits there every day. So it's completely transformed. Nothing like what it was for the last 75 years. Next. So there are berms on one end of all of these new wetlands, so they trap the water. So spring snow melt and runoff, and then whatever rain we do get just fills these up. And the water control structures are very easy to manage. They're not electronic or anything. It's just a very simple system of removing boards to control the water level, and they work great. Next. So you can see, if you're able to see, especially those in the back of the room, those potential drawdown areas associated with all of those wetlands. So we've got a lot of new habitat for migratory shorebirds here now. Next. Why does this all matter? What's the big deal? Well, one of the things that we've learned, and we're spending more and more time learning this from NexRad radar, is what's happening on a typical spring night, for example, when migratory birds are moving north across the landscape. Let's say that you're Swainson's thrush and you've been flying for 4 or 5 hours and you're starting to get tired, and there's a little bit of a westerly wind, and the flock you're in kind of gets pushed out some miles away from the lake shore. And if Swainson's thrush had the possessed human language, as dawn approached, he would look down and he would say, "Oh crap," because he's over water. And it's deep water. and Swainson's thrushes don't swim. So what does this bird have to do? It has to make a decision. Is it going to fly all the way across the lake and make landfall on the Michigan side, or is it going to turn into the wind and try to make it to the west shore of Lake Michigan? And that's what many individuals do. And that is exactly why positioning stopover habitat along the west shoreline of Lake Michigan is so critical, because many of these individuals are nearing exhaustion, their fat reserves are depleted, they need to make landfall and they need to make it soon. So what happens at dawn is this phenomenon that we call dawn ascension, where birds are out over the lake. They rise up maybe another 500 to 1,000 feet, and they're looking around to see where's the closest place that I can land. And hopefully, if they're here in southeastern Wisconsin, just offshore, they don't have to look far, and they see that string of pearls of habitat parcels in Ozaukee County, places where they can rest and then find all of the things that they need, not only shelter, but hopefully abundant sources of food as well. Next. So you can kind of see hour by hour how the NexRad imagery shows the movement of these masses of birds, sometimes hundreds of thousands of birds. One of the best ways of describing this that I've read is if you took a mile-long segment of the Illinois and Wisconsin state line on a night of peak migration, you might find 100,000 birds in 1 mile of that distance, moving hour by hour. So it's tremendous influx of birds on some nights. Next. So in addition to all of these things, I mentioned several times that this is often my last bulleted point, but providing all of these amenities for the human beings that come here to avail themselves of the educational opportunities that are here. We wanted to put up some amenities for them, as well as for some of the nesting species. We've got kestrel nest boxes. We've got nest boxes for eastern bluebirds and tree swallows. Also several boxes for purple martins. We've got several observation structures. I'm going to tell you a little bit more later about that image that you see in the upper left-hand corner there. That's our Raptor Watch platform. There's a lot of action happening there these last couple of years. Next. So here are some land trust volunteers erecting a kestrel nest box. We've got a nest box project spreading out from the land trust property here. We now have more than 80 nest boxes in this and other southeastern Wisconsin counties. Next. So when we established or reestablished the wetlands there, it required a lot of heavy equipment, and that's where we involved those local contractors to dig and reconfigure those the existing wetlands and put in place those new ones in the fall of 2009. Next. I mentioned several times that we had to decide what we were going to do with some of those individual trees. Some of them were cut and removed for the deciduous specimens, especially some of those big white ashes. We really targeted some that were heavy seed producers because we know that they're probably not going to be with us for too much longer. Next. And because of the emerald ash borer and all of the issues associated with it, all of our neighbors had to come and help us deal with that pile of firewood that resulted, and all of that cut ash had to be kept within that emerald ash borer quarantine area. And we created some massive brush piles, some that are 100 feet long. If you're a birder, it's a great place to be in spring and fall. Those brush piles are sparrow heaven. Tremendous place to see a wide variety of migrant species. Next. A lot of tree planting, more than 15,000 trees and shrubs put in all of those planting plans. Next. A lot of hand work and ongoing work to care for them. Next. And how are we assessing the results? How can we tell you whether any of this is doing any good or not? Well, we've done a lot of different kinds of monitoring work, point counts, some wandering surveys, some of these organized raptor counts, and some of you may be familiar with this relatively new event, the Big Sit, where you stay in a 17-foot diameter circle for a 24-hour period. We've organized a couple of those. So we've, from a landscape where nobody was focused on the birds, they were focused on birdies, you know, not on birds. Nobody was keeping track of bird records at all for all of those decades. In just the past 3 years, our cumulative species list was up to 232 as of the 31st of January. In the last 10 days, we added another species, so it's up to 233 species, which is pretty noteworthy considering it's only a 142-acre parcel. Again, remember, a critical part of this is the site's geography. It's right along the Lake Michigan shoreline, so a lot of migrants are already passing through, but we've actually provided a place for them to stop and rest and refuel. Next. A lot of our partners are entering their data in eBird. If you're not familiar with it, definitely stop and talk to Tom or talk to myself. It's a great way to make use of all of the bird observations that you collect. Here's the first part of the list, just shows the waterfowl relative abundance. The wider the line here, the more abundant these species are. Next. And here's the image showing the warblers, and you can easily see the parts of the calendar year where those species appear. Next. And some flyovers that in many cases don't stay here on this landscape, but we definitely see them. Noel and Tom Schaefer had an ibis species one day in fall. We often get common loons. We get snow geese now and then. We often get Caspian terns moving along the lakeshore, and at our raptor watch, we've had good numbers of peregrines in both fall and spring. Next. And some of the land bird migrants that we have found here, up in the upper left, blue-winged warbler, upper right, Swainson's thrush, my old friend long-eared owl that I've spent a lot of time trying to study and generally failing, Canada warbler, really sadly declining species, especially here in eastern Wisconsin. We've lost about 75% of the population of red-headed woodpeckers in the eastern half of Wisconsin. And then if you look at Forest Beach's signage, it's got a stylized image of this shrubland bird that I mentioned to you a while ago that's in decline, the brown thrasher. Next. So among these other things that we've done, Dr. Gary Casper is on the board of the Land Trust. He's a herpetologist. He's doing some herptile surveys on the landscape and doing a lot of great work out there. Next. And I've focused increasingly on surveying for bats as well. All of these indicate a hit, collected information on an individual, and you may not be able to see it, but there are so many hits of 4 or 5 species in the upper left-hand corner there. I actually had approximately 300 individuals one night. This was the 14th of September of 2009. So this landscape is important to migrating bats as well. Next. One of the things that we did was a huge blacktop parking lot that we no longer need, so we've transformed that from this impermeable surface that is always a problem with runoff. It is now completely permeable, and it's been made into a vegetated area again. So all that blacktop was removed. Next. Here's the clubhouse that I mentioned to you, the entity that I work for, the Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory. The Land Trust is eventually going to have about 4 or 5 nonprofit groups have office space in the clubhouse. We're the first ones. We're actually down here in the lower level. Come and visit us in our offices and library when you're in the area. We're in the former pro shop, and we still have Gulf stencils on the upper part of the wall around the edges of the room. That's gradually being removed or covered up. Next. So I've mentioned this several times. I don't think I can emphasize this enough. We really feel that there's high value in Forest Beach Migratory Preserve as an educational resource. So we're really working hard to bring a lot of people there to teach people about bird migration and conservation, and we think we're beginning to be pretty effective at that. Had some really large groups come attend events here in the last couple of years. We always have an International Migratory Bird Day event. We've had several years of, Kim's done a magnificent job of organizing a series of workshops that are known as Grosbeaks Galore, and we've had great results there. Maybe some of you have attended those as well. Next. I mentioned this relatively important structure here, kind of become a hot spot and the focus of a lot of activity. In fall of 2011, we dedicated this to a dear friend of ours who was very important as a raptor observer in southeastern Wisconsin for many years, Bill Cowart. Bill played French horn in the Milwaukee Symphony, but his real passion was birding and especially raptors. So if you come and visit us, and I hope you do, as you ascend the steps to the platform, you'll see a plaque dedicated to Bill. Next. Here's a graphic from one of the handouts from one of our recent International Migratory Bird Day events. We're having increased attendance at those with each passing year. Next. So you've already seen this image. There'll be a couple more like this. Aerial view of Forest Beach Migratory Preserve, as I've already mentioned to you. The lakeshore parcel here is still private inholding with a lot of homes. Here's the clubhouse. Here's, you can see some of the new wetlands here. The larger patch of forest here at the north. Next. Another similar image from a different perspective. Next. And yet another. And the offices of the observatory are there in the clubhouse. Next. So a lot of people to thank, because really a tremendous array of people have been involved in this. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Coastal Program and Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, Ozaukee Washington Land Trust, Ozaukee County Government, the Department of Natural Resources here in Wisconsin, already mentioned the Wisconsin Waterfowl Association, River Edge Bird Club, and then some of our private partners, SciTech Adventures, Lake Road Properties, then Wisconsin Society for Ornithology, Cedarburg Science, Great Lakes Ecological Services, EC3 Environmental Consulting Group, Pheasants Forever, and then a long list of neighbors and volunteers. We've got some great volunteers working with the Land Trust, making it possible to keep this place running smoothly. We can't go on without mentioning Eline. She owns Lake Road Properties on the south end, and she was there at a critical time to provide help with funding to purchase the land in the first place. Next. I hope you have questions, and there may be a little time for questions now, but if you don't get to ask the question, or maybe you don't think of the question for 30 minutes or so, come and find me or send me an email. Dr. Cutright's email there, and the observatory website's pretty simple, wglbbo.org.